What are some obscure video games you grew up with? Moria, a freeware roguelike that was likely one of the first, coming out very quickly after Rogue itself, using a version of the AD&D 2nd edition rules set. It was a pure, turn-based, ASCII dungeon dive. You had to watch your light source, hard to fight if you have no light, food stores. Forgetting to eat will debuff you and eventually kill you. Potions and scrolls were randomized each run, so you had to experiment with them to see what they did. Not sure how well known it actually was, but black and white too. You were a god and you could intervene in villagers' lives. You could gain power by being a benevolent god or a malicious god, and you got to pick a critter that could be taught to do good or evil. It was too ambitious for the capabilities at the time. I keep hoping someone would remake it. I like to scroll through these, and maybe I can find a game that's actually obscure. For some reason obscure or underrated just means favorite to people. Edit, I'll throw in a game I think that's actually obscure. Cyberdogs. EVO, The Search for Eden. It was kind of a bizarre side-scroller where you start as a little polywog and get Trevo points by basically fighting, eating other creatures, and put them into evolving new parts that grant you more power or different abilities. Really quirky and exceedingly fun, though grindy at times. I'm 17, so forgive me if you all think 2013 is recent, but I was 9 then. Ni no Kuni, Wrath of the White Witch is still my favorite video game of all time. Really fun and unique JRPG, which happens to be the only video game that Studio Ghibli ever worked on. They did the art, cutscenes, music, and some of the writing, and the whole game feels like playing through a Ghibli movie. A Ni no Kuni 2 was made, but Ghibli had nothing to do with that one, and the gameplay style was changed to be yet another hack and slash, but the story is still okay and the art style still looks good. Aside from the lack of Ghibli animated cutscenes, the second game got way more attention than the first ever did, which I think is criminal because the first is a million times better. Spike and Fang, for instance, Great Greed for Game Boy, the Robopon series, Custom Robo, Gotcha Force, Amazing Island, Magic Pendulum, Graffiti Kingdom. It's getting a mobile sequel in Japan, the Hamtaro games, Equinox, the Ark the Lad series, Lufia, Lunar, Star Ocean 2, Alfred Chicken, Car Battler Joe, Rhapsody, a musical adventure, Grandia, Solito Robo, Artonico, Monokemia, Mischief Makers, Sonic Shuffle, Valkyrie Profile, Magical Vacation, Star Sign, Dragon Warrior Monsters 2, Metal Walker for GBC. About 65% of what I love is really obscure, hard to find, or both. When I played Star Ocean 2 as a 10-year-old, I missed out on tons of optional partners, but somehow got the sequence of events to turn into Hellshow's limiter off on my first try and made the final boss much harder than normal. Instance Kirby's Dream Course, golf with Kirby abilities mixed in, meaning you can make your ball fly, electrocute, turn into a rock, etc. to eliminate enemies and turn the final enemy into the hole each round. Very strategic. Basic golf rules apply. N64 Bomberman 64 Great Battle Royals full of rolling time bombs, simple maps and power-ups. Xbox NHL hits. Fast-paced hockey gameplay with created players and big hits. Xbox NFL Street, simplified American football with stylized trick moves, power-ups, and amazing draft feature for 1v1 games. Xbox 360 Burnout 3, Takedown, racing game where causing opponents to crash earns you boost. Has amazing side game of like 50 levels where players must wreak havoc on unsuspecting traffic and beat high scores of damage created by destroying cars and tanker trucks. Can mildly control car post-crash and slow down time to maximize damage. There was a game on PlayStation 1 that was never released and you could only download and play on a modded PS1. It was called Thrill Kill. I believe it was never released due to how graphic, bloody and demented it was. Basically you could play one of several serial killers in hell, and had to fight for sport in hell. Two lesser-known ones I loved, for instance, Claymates, side-scroller where you play as a ball of clay that can morph into different animals. On Erasers, side-scrolling racing game where you are a unicycle. Kinda feels like Lily, but has an amazing sense of speed to it. Don't know how obscure it is, but I used to play The Blob with my older brother on the Wii. It was a game where you played as a little paint blob character and had to paint the city again after all the color had been stolen by those little ink guys. Looking back on it now, the ink guys definitely resembled Nazi invaders. I genuinely want to know if anyone else has played these. Bugdom. Incredible game where you're a roly-poly bug and have to defeat ants and bees and stuff, and at one point you ride a dragonfly. Cosmos Cosmic Adventure, platformer where you're a little green alien looking for your parents. Oxide, you're a marble and have to avoid obstacles. My mom got a Sega Dreamcast when it first came out and we would sit around as a family and play it. We had normal games, sure. But my favorite was Seaman. You raise a fish with a human face and talk to it. The fish was kind of an asshole. He was voiced by Spock Kirk. Then there's more fish and they mate and suck each other's blood, and it's really an interesting game. People always look at me like I'm insane when I talk about it, but maybe there's a Redditor out there that knows this game. Oh boy, Dark Star 1. I played the ever-loving crap out of that game when I was younger. Customize your ship, weapons and roam in space, dock in space stations and chill, with lots of dogfights in space. The cast was campy as hell with an equally campy story. I really wish that game came out on Steam. It had a lot of things that so many space games have today. It wasn't the first to do so, clearly, but such a fun game back then. Edit, just found out it's on GOG for only $2. These are good times. Command & Conquer, Renegade, FPS spin-off of the RTS series. Amazing gameplay that cleverly incorporated some of the strategy-based building elements of the main series. Flew under the radar a bit though. I reckon it was a bit ahead of its time. A remaster would kill. Haunting Ground was the best survival horror I ever played, and I always was the only person I knew who knew what it was. Eventually, years after release, somehow I guess it was temporarily available for download somewhere and I started seeing fan art. Bugdom was a game on our school computers we could play if we had free time. We had a Sega Genesis with Batman Forever and Jungle Book. Never beat them. They're too hard. First game I ever played was Toe Jam and Earl. Cap'n Crunch Crunchling or something like that. It came with Cap'n Crunch cereal. It was basically a little fuzzy animal that you fed and trained and grew up to like, compete in Olympic-type events. I remember a skateboarding race, jumping platform race and chucking cereal at molten rock that shot out of a volcano. We had very few mainstream games for us, and so basically everything we played was obscure. Some of the main ones I grew up with was Wanderers from Wise 3, Lagoon, Populous, and my favorite, Uncharted Waters New Horizons. They may have been popular at the time, but I've never heard much mention of them nowadays. Saberwolf and Jet Set Relief for the Spectrum were the first games I played, though that was because my brothers are both 7 years older than me. Oh, and there was this game called Eskimo Eddie who had a pet called Percy the Penguin. The game was rubbish, but to this day I absolutely adore penguins because of this game. The Dig from LucasArts. As a wannabe astronaut, I was obsessed. I also love the King's Quest series. RC Pro AM was my brother's and my favorite game. That and for the PC, Whiplash, we loved racing games. Super late. But Cosmic Fantasy 2 for the turbo graphics. It was on the CD attachment and super ahead of its time with full voice-acted anime cutscenes. Made me fall in love with JRPGs before I could even read. Watching my dad and brother play it, it's a fairly basic story full of RPG tropes and dialogue. Arc the Lad, Twilight of the Spirits. I have only ever met one other person who knew what this game was, and they just happened to be cosplaying as one of the characters. When I shouted the character's name across the convention hall, they ran straight for me and started jumping up and down from excitement. Lol. Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem on GameCube was an amazing game. Wish there was a sequel. Crazy stuff would start happening if your character saw too much bizarre stuff. You would see your character's body parts start falling off, that it would just flash back to normal, or it would post a fake controller unplugged message, etc. Toy Commander for Sega Dreamcast. Each level had a very different type of mission with a variety of vehicles played in different rooms in a house. You played from the toy's perspective. There was also crazy boss battles and multiplayer battles. Also many Commodore Amiga games. Mainly it came from the desert, a game about giant ants attacking a small town. It felt like you could do so much in the game back then. Escape the hospital while doctors and nurses chase you. Fly a plane and crop dust ants. Get into knife fights and games of chicken with local greaser gang. Control tanks against the giant ant invasion. Really would love a remake. I don't think it's as obscure as some of the games listed here, but I'm going to go with Star Wars Episode 1, Jedi Power Battles. When I see people talking about Star Wars games, I never see anyone mentioning Jedi Power Battles. A fun retelling of Episode 1 with 5 different playable Jedi, Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, Mace, Adagallia, and Plo Koon. I was never very good at it, but I really enjoyed it. One of my favorites as a kid was Solaris on the Atari 2600. Sci-fi space shooter with some simulated 3D elements. Graphics and effects were way ahead of its time, but it wasn't a big selling game. In the 8-bit era, my cousin and I loved playing Genghis Khan on the NES. It was like Romance of the Three Kingdoms or Nobunaga's Ambition, but all of those games were fairly niche. On my older PC, one fairly obscure game that I really loved was Planescape Torment, built on the Baldur's Gate Diablo engine. Really unique game, great story, lots of interesting characters. I also used to play this one game, I think it was called Pimp Wars or something. It was a text-based dial-up BBC bulletin board, early internet shit game. Pretty stupid but kind of fun. I'd be battling my high school friend Greg, Pimp Daddy Felix, for sections of turf. Leisure Suit Larry, good times trying to get full access through the trivia questions. Later on, Echo the Dolphin. First one, handheld Space Invaders. If you put the batteries in backwards, all you got was a mothership and you could shoot it infinite times for a high score. Total Annihilation, an RTS that came out about the same time as StarCraft and was infinitely better. I still play the soundtrack. Rage, Incoming, an alien shooter kind of thing that came bundled with the compact my dad bought. I was too young to know how to play and never passed the first couple stages. Lol. It also came with a motorcycle racing game that K got pretty good at. Heavy Gear 2, a bit of a knockoff of the MechWarrior games. It had a clan system and some pretty mechanically heavy weapon systems. I wish this genre would come back. Also loved a few knockoff games of popular franchises, Mech Commander, and its sequel, an RTS adaptation of MechWarrior, and Command & Conquer, Renegade, an FPS based in the CNC universe. That game had so many features we see in modern FPS games almost 20 years later. Or if we go back a little earlier, my elementary school had an Apple lab that had a suite of games by Mech. Oregon Trail is the obvious superstar, but the game for me was about launching a paper plane. Paper Plane Pilot was the name, had to look it up. I remember also Tiger Woods golf game and the announcer going, "Oh, it's in the deep stuff, Ed." Had to look this one up, and I believe I'm thinking of Microsoft Golf 2.0 and the DOS era game Gorillas, with gorillas and explosive bananas that you had to arc onto the other. My earliest games that had a big impact on me were on the SNES. I'll skip the obvious link to the past though. My biggest was Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars. I've never met a single person IRL who has played the game, though I've heard it mentioned a few very rare times online. It was an amazing RPG, and the ability to affect your moves in a turn-based game by pressing buttons at the right time stayed with me for decades. Also, I was obsessed with Geno for a while. Dude was a real badass. Also a shout out of the Lost Vikings, made by Blizzard before they actually became Blizzard. It was an action-adventure puzzle side-stroller. You switched control between 3 Vikings, each with their own abilities, but the 2 you weren't controlling still existed and could be in danger if you leave them unattended. Great puzzle game, and is loved to see it ported to a modern console, especially the Switch. I don't know how obscure it was, but I was the only one I knew that had ever heard of it or played it, but Shining Force on the Genesis. I must have dumped hundreds of hours into this game and its sequel over the years. The turn-based strategy aspect made it unlike any other RPG I had ever seen. I want to say it was called Slime World on the Sega Genesis. You were some Rhino guy with a water jet backpack, like in Mario Sunshine, but 2D. I don't remember much of the main game, but it did have multiplayer, where you would hunt each other and use some of the slime's shenanigans properties to try and best each other. Transformers animated for the Nintendo DS. We lost the game, but while we had it, I played the heck out of the first level because I was too young to understand what load game was, and I started a new game every time I played. Strategic Conquest, old Macintosh turn-based strategy game that had you play against the computer, or friends over Apple Talk, and take over the world. The one thing I really remember, besides having to uncover the map with your units, was that the maps themselves were randomly generated, pretty good for a game from 1989. I was treated to a litany of hilarious PS1 and PS2 shovelware back in the day. There was Dirt Jockey, a bizarre product placement by Komatsu Heavy Industries that was basically every 6-year-old boy's construction equipment fantasy. Except you had Gran Turismo-esque license tests to keep them from actually doing it. Metropolis Mania and its sequel were Harvest Moon creator Natsume's Grush-filled attempt at creating what was essentially SimCity from a different perspective. The games were panned even back in the day for their mediocre dialogue. It's certainly not obscure nowadays. But back in 2000, Crash Team Racing was being outsold 10-1 by Mario Kart 64 despite being a superior game. I caught so much crap from my friends for being a guy who always played as Coco. Does anyone remember Jersey Devil? It was a late entry to the late 90s 3D platformer craze that got crushed underfoot by the Rareware games on Nintendo and Spyro and Crash on PlayStation. ZZT, it's an ASCII game run on DOS, where you could use the ZZT programming language to program characters to move, ask questions, give objects. With a little imagination, you could make any game you wanted, where the main character was a white face who shot bullets. I made a Star Trek game that had a bridge, engineering, captain's quarters, and a working holodeck. I can't remember the name, but it was for the NES. It was a baseball game, but the players were robots. You could upgrade their offensive and defensive abilities, improve their armor and give them weapons. If there was a close play at a base, the robots would go into Mortal Kombat style fighting and the winner would determine if you were safe or out. It was a lot of fun. Below the Root on DOS and Snake Rattle and Roll on the NES are the ones none of my friends played but that I played the heck out of. There was so much shareware I played on our family 286 I have fond memories of but have no idea what the names of all of them were. I tried to Google them and I can't find much. Gold Box from SSI, Pool of Radiance was really a step forward for games on PC. Betrayal at Printer, open world game, fantastic graphics, extremely unique combat system all done in like 1995, was better than its contemporaries, Daggerfall in most ways.